Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the truly chilling investigation of the Gilgo Beach serial killings. Honestly, this is a fast-paced true crime thriller that spans 3 entire decades. We're talking missed clues, terrifying sadism, and a monster who literally hid right under the noses of his own community. Let's get right into it. Okay, picture this. A prolific serial killer, a phantom who haunted Long Island for decades, is finally outsmarted by his own lunch. Yeah, you heard that right. The bizarre reality of this case is that a half-eaten pizza crust, casually tossed into a Manhattan trash can, ended up being the ultimate trap for a killer hiding in plain sight. Section 1. A monster in plain sight. The arrest. So, in July 2023, the world was introduced to Rex Heuermann. He was a 6'4" Midtown Manhattan architect, a husband and a father living in a quiet, everyday suburb. But behind that incredibly mundane facade was a ruthless predator. The selfie you're seeing was actually taken by Heuermann himself and uploaded to a fictitious burner email account. Because while his professional life was all about blueprints and building codes, his secret life relied heavily on burner phones and fake identities to solicit escorts for illicit and ultimately deadly meetings. And this unsettling behavior definitely bled into his daily life. There's this story of a female coworker who was absolutely terrified when Heuermann somehow tracked her down while she was away on a remote cruise vacation. He reached out just to send a message saying, "I told you I could find you anywhere." It's just a horrifying glimpse into his absolute obsessive need for control.
His paranoia was staggering too. In just a 14-month period, Heuermann used his burner accounts to search for updates on his own investigation over 200 times. Think about that. He was obsessively tracking the very task force that was hunting him down, looking for podcasts, documentaries, and furiously searching why law enforcement couldn't trace his calls.
Section 2. Discovering the Gilgo 4, a graveyard in the sand.
Now, the way this horror unraveled was like a rapid-fire domino effect. Back in May 2010, an escort named Shannon Gilbert makes a frantic 911 call. She's screaming, "These people are trying to kill me," before completely vanishing into a marsh. Months go by, and then a police canine unit searching for Shannon accidentally uncovers the skeletal remains of another woman, Melissa Bartholomew. Within days, the police realized they hadn't just found one body. They had literally stumbled into a serial killer's sprawling dumping ground, uncovering multiple sets of remains by April 2011. A deeply chilling pattern instantly connected the first 4 victims, who became known as the Gilgo 4: Melissa, Maureen, Megan, and Amber Lynn. All of them were young women in their 20s. All of them worked as online escorts. They were found similarly positioned, bound, and 3 of them were wrapped in camouflaged hunting-style burlap. It's just heartbreaking. These were daughters and mothers whose lives were violently stolen by a highly organized predator.
And you know, this predator wasn't just organized. He was brutally sadistic. Shortly after Melissa Bartholomew disappeared, her 15-year-old sister began receiving terrifying phone calls from Melissa's cell phone. It was the killer. Calling right from the crowded, bustling streets of Midtown Manhattan, he repeatedly taunted this teenager, explicitly describing what he had done to Melissa and telling her flat out, "I killed Melissa."
Section 3. The architect's double life, hiding in plain sight.
So how on earth did he compartmentalize this unimaginable evil for decades? Well, the answer lies in a terrifying geographical triangle. Point 1 is his home in Massapequa Park, which is where the victims' cell phones pinged before they vanished. Point 2 is Midtown Manhattan, where his architectural firm was located, and exactly where those taunting phone calls originated. And point 3, Gilgo Beach, the desolate, sandy dumping ground, just a quick 20-minute drive from his front door. Investigators also found a terrifying convenience in the timeline of the murders. The disappearances of these women perfectly aligned with times when Heuermann's wife and children were traveling out of state, often vacationing in Iceland or New Jersey. Whenever his family left, his suburban home allegedly became a literal house of horrors.
The contrast here is just sickening. By day, he's a normal guy negotiating building permits. But by night, using an alias called Sandbagger303, he scoured the dark web. Court documents actually revealed his search history included medieval torture of women, highly specific violent pornography, and photos of autopsies.
Section 4. From Dust to DNA, the Science of Catching a Killer.
Things finally broke open in early 2022 when a new multi-agency task force fired off a triad of connected evidence: First up, a victim's roommate remembered the killer drove a first-generation Chevy Avalanche, which, it turns out, was a vehicle Heuermann owned. Second, they mapped burner phone cell tower pings that perfectly bridged his office and his home. And third, they used advanced mitochondrial DNA testing on highly degraded hairs found on the victim's burlap restraints.
From there, investigators meticulously cross-referenced his American Express credit card swipes with those burner phone billing records. They were able to prove that Heuermann was repeatedly in the exact same physical locations in Manhattan and Long Island at the exact times those burner phones were used to contact the victims. A massive breakthrough.
Now, unlike standard nuclear DNA, which you'd find in a hair root, mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, can actually be extracted from a degraded hair shaft that lacks a root, allowing scientists to trace maternal lineage. Using this exact breakthrough, forensic scientists matched female hairs found on the victims' bodies directly to the DNA profile of Heuermann's wife. These were hairs she likely shed at home that then transferred to the victims during the murders.
But they still needed a direct match to Rex himself. Bringing our narrative full circle back to that pizza, detectives tailing Heuermann watched him discard a pizza box in a Manhattan trash can. They swooped in, seized it, swabbed the crust, and got an undeniable DNA match to a male hair found wrapped in the burlap with Megan Waterman. The trap was officially sprung.
Section 5. The Unresolved Mystery. The Lingering Shadows.
Heuermann was arrested, but sadly, the horror didn't just end there. In April 2026, Heuermann pleaded guilty to 7 murders. But shockingly, he also admitted in court to an 8th murder, Sandra Castilla, who was killed way back in 1993. This officially proved that his double life as a serial killer lasted for nearly 3 full decades before he was finally caught.
And we really have to remember the grim reality of the number 11. Over the course of the police searches, 11 sets of human remains were found scattered along those beaches and parkways. We're talking about a dumping ground of an unimaginable scale, utilized by a predator who felt he was completely untouchable.
Even with these massive breakthroughs, some really dark shadows linger. The identities of some victims, like Asian Doe, remain entirely shrouded in mystery. We have a mother known only as Peaches and her toddler daughter. We have victims like Karen Vergata, whose remains were scattered across Fire Island and Tobay Beach. The full geographic extent of his dumping grounds, and honestly, the complete list of his victims, are still actively being investigated today.
At the core of this explainer is a monster who perfectly compartmentalized his existence. For 30 years, he lived a life of sadistic violence right alongside a boring, everyday suburban routine. He walked among his neighbors, worked with his colleagues, and raised his family, all while secretly terrorizing the most vulnerable people he could find.
He is currently serving consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But you know, the task force hasn't stopped working. With a proven timeline now stretching all the way back to 1993, we are left with a haunting, unavoidable question. How many other secrets are still buried in the sand? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious and stay safe.